Hi, my name is Dr. India White, and I am a TEDx speaker, co-author with Cengage Learning, Big Ideas Learning, and National Geographic Learning. And I'm also an author of over 45 books. I'm really passionate about education. I've been in the education space over 15 years, where I was an administrator, math coach, and as a result, I know the power of learning progressions. And so I want to talk today with you guys about learning progressions and high school, middle school pathways, and how that all affects student achievement and their success. So let's get into it. I'm super excited. All right, so here we are. We're going to talk today about understanding learning progressions in high school pathways for student success. We're going to look into grades 4 through 8, but we'll also go a little bit beyond. And so with that said, I want to bring on first on board, why is this a moment of discussion in our history today? Well, look at the NAEP data. The NAEP data came from the National Report Card, and it talks about how, unfortunately, guys, there has been a decrease in math student achievement for 4th and 8th grade math students. It is shown that those grades, the points have gone down 5 points since pre-pandemic, so since 2019. Now, my friends and I were able in the state of Florida to predict that if we continued education in math the way that we've been doing, it would take over 217 years to close the achievement gap in math for students of diverse backgrounds and their peers. So unfortunately, those scores have dropped. This is the 2022 NAEP data. Those scores have dropped 5 points for 4th graders and 8 points for 8th graders. So there means that is a sense of urgency. There's an issue here. We have to do what we can to help our children. And one of the things that we can do is definitely help them through our learning progressions. But before we get started, I want to also talk about graduation rates that have been predicted in CES, talking about those projections to education statistics just came out. These graduation rates for 2023, 2024 for your secondary students, it's showing here, it's going to be 2% lower in 2023, 2024 school year. And then also, if you're looking at public high school, it's saying it'll be 1% higher. But then look at this, private high schools, it says that it's going to decrease by 26%, guys. That means that we have to do something different. We have to figure out how can we continue to close the achievement gap? How can we continue to speak to student achievement and learn about these projections so that students can, better show that they're proficient in our math classrooms. So with that said, I now want to talk about also different regions of how these data points have affected our students. So if you look at high school graduates by region, it shows, guys, that there is a decrease in the Northeast regions and the Midwest regions, and there's also an increase in the South regions and in the West regions. So we have to see how can we change this trajectory so that all regions will see that there's an increase of graduation rates of our students. And so now let's talk about learning progressions. I was able to get this from Dr. Michael Batista, who is an expert in learning progressions, and he stated that learning progressions are descriptions of the successively more sophisticated ways of thinking about a topic that follow one another as students learn about and investigate the topic. And so with that said, also, to back his definition, we had Karen Hess, who in 2010, in her research titled Learning Progressions Framework Designed with Common Core State Standards in Mathematics K-12, she summarized her work by saying that she agreed with Dushel et al. That learning progressions are anchor points that are coherent ideas of reasoning and practice, but they're also the ideas that they don't start out as seeming as if they're critical for the big idea and a concept in a math classroom. However, they are absolutely imperative for constructively building upon the main idea within the learning context. So as you can see here, learning progressions is just a way, it's a navigation tool for students when they're looking at the main idea to get that main concept. Now, not only are we going to continue talking about learning projections, we'll also talk about learning trajectories and what is this all about? Because as educators, if we don't even understand what what it is that we are doing in the math space. It's not enough just to get a math textbook and say, okay, I'm teaching 4th grade. Okay, I'm teaching algebra 1. There's more to it. We have to be able to approach this by saying, I'm teaching this. These are the big ideas within the context. These are the learning projections. These are the learning trajectories. And these are the standards and the questionings that I can use to guide my student through that level of success. We have to have an overall picture of what that looks like. And so, and back to Dr. Batista, who he spoke about these learning trajectories, and he spoke about we have to figure out where students are in their learning. We have to also see that sometimes students, they'll jump through main ideas to get, past the big idea within a progression. Also, he talked about you have to determine that, where students are by getting them to talk about those strategies and how would they get to their reasoning. Now, this is imperative. One thing I love is to talk about metacognition and higher order thinking skills, Bloom's taxonomy, STEMs, things that leads those students to their answers. It's not enough just to throw a question out there and then have a student just popcorn out answers just because it's a convenient answer. We have to understand the procedural fluency, the conceptual understanding that's leading to those answers, and that the student can truly model that they are proficient in the context that we are presenting to them. So with that said, I now want to play for you guys. I want to share my screen. I'm going to talk a little bit more about learning progressions, more of a definition, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of a talking point about it.
Progressions between the state standards focus on the progressions of topics across a wide range of grade levels, embedded in educational research and research-based best practices, with the structure of mathematics being at its core. We would be remiss to discuss standards and instruction without focusing on the glue that holds mathematics together. This narrative of progressing structure, relationships, and content assists in helping both teachers and students maintain conceptual understanding and the ability to build off prior knowledge without jumping from concept to concept in a meaningless way. Just like a great literature has a story, thread, a plot sequence, relationships with characters, mathematics at its core is interconnected. Touch Math can assist the flow of mathematics progressions that follow a standard from the start of a content strand to the end of the domain area.
So I'm going to stop there. Like he's saying, you're starting with the concept strand, but then you're ending at the domain area. I now want to dive into more of what Dr. Michael Batista was saying about learning progressions with everybody, so that we can kind of get more research about it and what does it look like? What does it really mean? So I want to play now about learning trajectories, as we heard more about learning progressions. Some people don't know what the difference is between the two of learning trajectories versus learning progression. So take a look here.
Similar is learning trajectory, and for some people, learning trajectories mean the same thing as learning progressions. But for other people, there's a difference. So Les Steffi talked about an actual learning trajectory for a student. So a model of children's initial concepts and operations. It accounted the observable changes in these concepts and operations as a result of children's interactive mathematical activity in situations of learning. So it's basically trace out everything that you do with the student. And if you've ever read any of Les Steffi's stuff, that's exactly what he does. Doug Clements and Julie Sarama talked about learning trajectories as descriptions of children's thinking and learning in a specific mathematical domain and a related conjectured route through instructional tasks. Okay, so both Steffi's and Clements and Sarama were sort of talking about that progressions through pretty much specified instructional treatments. Okay, for me, learning progressions are more general than that. They're not.
And so I just think it's interesting how, like Dr. Batista is saying, you can take a learning projection and that's kind of the big broad idea versus a learning trajectory is you actually have a standard, you have a path, whereas you're navigating students throughout that big idea in a math space. However, there are some other questions. I'm going to come back to that video in a little bit when we're talking about learning progressions and what they're for. But let's go back to Dr. Hessen or Mrs. Hess's research and some possible uses for learning projections within the framework documents and whatnot. You can use it to analyze general sequencing of existing major curricular points. You can also use it to create formative tools and use student work as analysis processes. So this right here is imperative, because when you start to use student work, that is your basis of being able to evaluate whether or not that student got that big idea. And then wherever you see that there's holes in their learning, that's when you can go back to the learning projection or the learning trajectory and say, okay, we've got to fill in the content knowledge there. Now, the key is that we have to come to the table realizing that not all students will come, with prior knowledge of that content area. So therefore, they might be on various levels within their learning, which can affect their ability to really perceive what it is that you're trying to teach them. And so the key is to make sure that we as educators are equipping our students so that if there are learning gaps, through our instructional delivery and our explanation of the learning trajectories, learning targets, and success criteria, that these learning progressions will be conceptualized by our students as a whole. So with that said, I want to now go back to the clip of Dr. Batista and what he was talking about with learning progressions, because he kind of elaborates about one of the things that, we have dealt with in our nation regarding student placement, tracking, and things like that, and how unfortunately this can get conceptualize as students being labeled as a level 1 student, a level 2 student. The student is not proficient. The student can't learn. But the danger of that is if we don't approach education in a sense that students can learn trajectories and learn progressions, but that they're just a number, that we've labeled them, then that takes their ability and their power away to really navigate through learning, to really conceptualize, to really have a metacognitive experience, because they're already thinking that they're below and that they can't do it. And so he's going to talk a little bit about having students at levels and what that means in regards to projections.
So one of the issues that people have with learning progression sometimes is, are students at levels? Should we talk about a level 1 student? And my answer to that is generally no. I mean, I'm interested in what kind of reasoning is the student using at this point in time, okay?
Right.
And usually, just saying the student is at level 3 isn't completely accurate. I mean, sometimes that happens, but students are constantly in transition. So it's a little too, it's oversimplified to say a student is. And I also don't like the idea of classifying a student. I like to think about the student's reasoning, because that's what I can build on, not, oh, this is a level 1 student. Okay, so how do you deal with that? Well, one way we've dealt with it, and so that I can get into some additional stuff, is thinking about profiles, okay? A CBA learning progression profile. So here's another learning progression. This is for place value. And here's a student in grade 2. So this is, and I'm not going to show you all his work, okay? But I'll show you just a little bit. So Mary has 24 cookies. She eats 6 of them. How many cookies are left? 24 subtract 6. 24, and he counts down, okay? But he misses a number, 20, okay? So in the learning progression, he's still having some difficulties with counting. Now, of course, this is counting backwards or down, not counting up, which the two are, you get one before the other. Here's another problem. Here he used an algorithm. So he said it was 11, so I put a 1 right here under 4 in 24, and a 1 up here above 4 in 47, and then I put 1 plus 4 plus 2, and it equals 7. What does this 1 stand for? To add with the 4 and the 2. Is it just a 1? Yes. Okay. So for us, that's an indicator that he doesn't really get place value in the algorithms. The students who did get it would say, no, it's a 1, it really is a 10, okay? So he's sort of level 1, okay? And I probably should mention that if a student can use an algorithm to do something, it doesn't tell you a whole lot about their conceptual development. So I'm going to
stop there for the sake of time, but as you can see, this is why it's very imperative to have assessments and then check on student knowledge. The power of questioning in a math classroom is everything, because as you question students, it's not enough just to teach that child about the concept and about the big idea, about that learning progression. You have to go back through and check for understanding to make sure that they're not missing any significant gaps in their learning process, so that they can really vouch for their proficiency in your class. So with that said, we'll continue to move forward. We talked here, Hess also talked about there are 6 major LPF strands. I'm not going to go into great detail, but the first strand was symbolic expression. And then, of course, the second strand was the nature of numbers and operations. And that talked about various skills within foundation. Then the next strands mentioned were measurement, which, progress indicators were organized under 2 key learning targets for each grade span. She had patterns, relations, and functions. Those are progress indicators that were organized under 2 key learning targets for each grade spans. Then there was geometry, which, it was, again, the same thing. And then, of course, data analysis, probability, and statistics, which they also organized under 2 key learning targets, so grade spans. So these first steps in developing those strands within her work, it also talked about having progressively more sophisticated or complex grade span learning targets. And then, of course, this was established with the underlying conceptual framework that could be built upon across grades and linked to specific research-based progressions of skills and concepts that were needed to achieve designated learning targets. So all of these progressions are research-based, and that's why they have been vetted through. They have been trusted, but now it's great that we have the research, we have the content, but now what does that look like when we're trying to implement it into the classroom? And so I'm going to talk a little bit more. She talked about reading and interpreting an LPF for a grade span. So you'll see an example here of, starting out, you want to, build an understanding of computational strategies and algorithms. Can they fluently add, subtract, multiply, and estimate? And then, of course, looking at grades K4, it's like by the end of grade 4, students should demonstrate and apply those skills and concepts related to numbers and operations in a variety of situations of problem-solving contexts. The learning targets, there are more general or broad performance descriptors that are associated with specific skills and concepts of each grade level. So this is just one thing that, has put in her research regarding learning progressions and how to read it and interpret it. And I think that's another area of focus for all educators, is getting those learning progressions and really working with your team, whether it's through a PLC or whatnot, to see how can I really interpret these accurately so I can be as proficient as possible and competent as possible, so that I can then help my children be proficient and competent as well. And so we'll continue going. So now we also want to talk about pathways. What are pathways? So I found this little thing here about pathways through math and science. And so this, I'm now going to have a little focus on secondary. So it talks about how, you'll have these pathways. For instance, you have students starting in a math class, Algebra 1, usually 50% of students start around Algebra 1, then they go into geometry and Algebra 2. So these are the different pathways. In 9th grade, it says that more than half of the students took Algebra 1 or a course that was similar. And then in the 12th grade, the 2 most common course types were, other than advanced math courses, they included trig, statistics, and probability, and calculus at 15%. More than a quarter of students did not take a math course in the 12th grade. So the thing about learning trajectories or learning progressions is that leads a student to be able to then have the flexibility that they need throughout the pathways to thrive and be successful. So the better that we as educators are able to really implement those learning progressions within the learning constructs, that's going to help students feel more confident to approach trig, statistics, calculus, within their senior year of their learning. And so another thing, though, is we have to be careful with the pathways and with how students are being placed within these pathways, because that can determine their trajectory and college and career readiness. And so one thing we don't want to do is work against our students by, assuming, oh, well, I don't know if that student could handle calculus, so I only let them go up to pre-calculus. I only let them take, this level of math because I'm just not confident in their ability to understand the progressions to be able to do it. Well, that's why we come into play as educators to make sure that our students will be able to exceed our expectations and to take advantage of those classes. And studies have even shown that if you give a student an opportunity to learn, then the students will be able to grow in their attainment of the knowledge because they've had exposure versus having that opportunity gap where the student is not even given an opportunity to new content or to grade level content because we're afraid that the student cannot perform. So these are just some of the pathways that were mentioned regarding high school. And so now I want to talk about how those learning progressions impact student achievement. For one, these learning progressions, they help to establish the pathway for college and career readiness. They also provide clarity on student coursework as students navigate through their math classes. And then they also guide and motivate those students in various options needed for those pathways. We found that, with these pathways, we also found that 10% of the students, they took most frequent math sequences. And the thing is, we have to have conversations with guidance counselors that are placing students in classes, especially if you're dealing with students of various diverse backgrounds and ethnicities. How many of those students are really given a chance to tackle, some of those higher level math courses? What are we doing different? Why are we saying that we don't think this student could do it? I mean, I'll share a personal story. I was in a particular class, and at the time I had a 92%, and in those days, an A was a 94%. I think some of you guys can remember that. And I asked the teacher, I said, hey, can I please get the AP course for this class? And the teacher said, India, I don't think you can do it because, you had a 92%. And the requirement is that, you're supposed to have a 94%. And as a result, I had to take just the honors level. So my senior year, I had, AP government, AP calculus, it had Spanish for all this, and English for honors. Well, guess what? I was able to pass that with flying colors, went to college, and I felt a little bit like I wasn't as confident as I should have been in English because I had that mark against me of not having AP English. But now, as an author writing math books for a living, I think of the benefit I could have had if I was in that teacher's AP class, but I was held back and placed in honors and not given the chance to thrive because I was 2 points behind. See, I wish the teacher would have said, I think I have confidence in you that you can understand the progressions of the content that's going to be taught. You can understand those standards. You'll understand the big ideas, and I'll give you a chance. And I think that's what we need to do for our students that, maybe come from various subgroups and various diverse areas and maybe some underrepresented areas, is instead of just marking them out altogether, give them a chance in their learning and see how they'll do. And so, when you're giving them a chance, it's going to move more students into STEM field, STEM area, STEM fields or STEM related areas for their success as they are crossing over into their college and career readiness. And so with that said, let's keep going. And I want to now talk about those pathway strands and in efforts to best scaffold the work of navigating students through those pathways. There were 6 strands that has found that supported the efforts of students succeeding on their math journey. And so I'm just going to kind of tap these, as we go along. So the first strand was symbolic expression, and that was the use of manipulation of symbols and expressions that provided a variety of representation for solving problems and expressing mathematical concepts, relationships, and reasoning. Okay, and then of course it walks through. So if you're looking, 4th through 8th grade, you're going to see, well, first things first, the student will use equations and expressions involving basic operations to represent a given content. And then, they'll move on to being able to represent those relationships and interpret expressions and equations in terms of a given content for determining an unknown value. So you're constantly moving it moving it a notch up, moving it a notch up, as those students are working through these progressions and through these various strands. And so then the second strand is the nature of numbers and operations. And so that's talking about understandings of numbers, how many versus how much, and, the number types that, are extended for the application of arithmetic properties and operations, number systems. And so you'll see here, you kind of guide through that elementary level, are they able to kind of build on whole numbers and fractions and decimals? And then, you're going to the middle school level where you're then going to go into rational numbers and irrational numbers. So you continue to build along the nature of numbers and operations. Then strand 3 was measurement, where it talks about measurement attributes, processes, and tools that help quantify, compare, and solve problems involving objects, situations, and events. And so for 4th grade, you want students to be able to at least explore relationships among units and attributes and measurements within a system of measurement. Then it moves on to them extending their understanding of attributes and units by the time they're in middle school. And then, of course, it goes to high school where it's more complex and abstract quantities. And then, of course, strand 4, patterns, relationships, and functions. So they're starting with the patterns, relationships, and functions used to represent and analyze change. So elementary, you want them to use concrete, pictorial, symbolic representations. But then, of course, when you're going into middle school, you want them to then begin to model those contextual situations. Strand 5 is geometry. So you're going to have visualization, spatial reasoning, and properties of 2- and 3-dimensional figures that can be analyzed, represented, and modeled, geometric concepts and relationships. So in 4th grade-ish, you want students in the elementary schools to be able to recognize that 2- and 3-dimensional shapes have particular attributes. But then when you're moving into middle school, you want them to be able to classify those objects based on those attributes and properties, and even solve problems using geometric relationships and properties. And then strand 6, data analysis, probability, and statistics. So you're starting with questions that are posed and investigated by collecting data and retrieving existing data, representing and analyzing and interpreting data, investigations, inferences, and predictions, and how they're used to make critical and informed decisions. And so 4th grade, you're wanting students to gather and interpret data to answer questions to a particular single content, but then you want them in the middle school 8th graders to compare populations by analyzing distributions of terms and variability and measures of central tendency. You want them to formulate questions, gather data, and build those representations. So as you can see, it's kind of like, in the elementary grades, yeah, you're introducing them to a concept, but then you're wanting them to really start to unpack that knowledge and to really do that through those frameworks, through the progressions that you have, and to be able to build upon prior knowledge so that they can really show mastery of it in that particular grade level. But then, of course, because they're going to need it for high school and then higher education. So how do these pathways and trajectories navigate growth? Well, they provide a clear pathway for student success. You have that students, they'll have a college pathway. Do they need to take calculus, or do they need to take, up to statistics? Do they need to take up to trigonometry? Depending on the pathway of their life, depending on, what are they dealing with every day in the math class? How many learning gaps do they have? What resources do they have or do they lack? So with all of these in place, the one thing you want to do is to always provide options. You don't want to leave any options off of the table. Provide for students the university path. Provide for them the technical school path. Provide for them the path of, okay, you're going to enroll in the military. You need this. But whatever you do, prepare that child for college and career readiness, because every student can find success along their way. And so another thing is to highlight various STEM fields of interest, whether that's engineering, technology, astronomy, and beyond, that will cultivate a learning for math. So why would we do this? Because we're trying to motivate students in various demographics through those progressions. You'll find that, maybe students of various diverse backgrounds. Since I'm African-American, I'll talk about African-American data. So research shows that African-American descent males, whenever they were trying to get motivated in STEM fields, they were motivated by careers that had higher paying salaries. So if we knew that, then we would be able to tie a higher paying, career field, maybe an astronaut, maybe an aerospace engineer, maybe a heart doctor, a surgeon or whatnot, and talk about those examples and make it realistic for the lives of those students. Pull up information online of legit vetted research regarding these careers and African Americans in those fields, but then also, highlight various African Americans in their community that are doing a great job in those fields to motivate those students to then love the math. And when they start asking that question, when would I ever need this? Well, if you're ever going to be an aerospace engineer, if you're ever going to be a mechanical engineer or an astronaut or a surgeon or a doctor, you're going to need this math, because this is what's going to help you to become a better astronaut, to become a better software engineer, and you motivate the students through that. So sometimes we think, oh, the student's just not interested, we just can't do it. No, I think they are interested. We just have to somehow figure out the big picture of how to get that student's personal life connected to the higher levels of math content that we're presenting to them. And so with that said, some strategies to cultivate growth in student achievement and proficiency through pathways and progressions include establishing goals for completing courses in a timely fashion, mentioning various incentives and rewards that are available. So maybe there's a scholarship that they can get for school, or some military opportunities or internships that they can also take advantage of as they're learning. Also using positive peer motivation to keep students connected as they achieve as a cohort together, so that they don't want to be left behind, because everybody's achieving and thriving, so they want to be a part of that. And then challenging your students to develop their growth mindset during challenging moments, and also during moments where they're trying to harness grit and make grit come alive in the classroom. And so with that said, this makes me think about tracking and how tracking affects student progress. So some of the pros of tracking for student progress includes it's a navigating tool to help students finish their math trajectory in a realistic amount of time once they are establishing their accuracy. But the cons of that is that students can be stuck on a particular trajectory where when we're now looking at, oh, well, this student is a level 1, like Dr. Batista mentioned, instead of looking at this student can learn, this student can go beyond level 1. I don't want to box my kid in because I'm assuming that the paper said that they're a level 1, so they're always going to be a level 1. Maybe not. Maybe we have to look at those levels as sliding scales of opportunity for that student to, maybe you're level 1 here, but then you bounce to level 4, you bounce to level 2, you bounce to level 3. But whatever we do, we don't want to take away the opportunity for a student to learn because we're so focused on their level or on where they have been tracked in schools. Also, tracking a student, it does affect their self-efficacy, in which, they can build upon, or it can hinder their self-confidence as an independent math thinker. So we have to be very careful when we're trying to build up our students, that we're not, doing damage as a result of tracking our learners. And so how do we eliminate the opportunity gap with learning progressions? So we can eliminate barriers towards academic growth that may occur as a result of tracking or progressions by working through various biases that can hinder students towards achieving in higher level math content. So if that student comes to you, they might not look like they can do Calculus 1. We might want to give them an opportunity. If a student is approaching a teacher saying, hey, I would like to be considered for honors geometry or, pre-calculus honors or trig, instead of saying, I don't know if you should be in that class, or I want to weed you out because you might affect my overall testing score as an educator. When I get my results back at the end of the year, I want all 5s and 4s. No, instead of approaching it like that, we should really approach it with an open mindset, giving all students a fair opportunity to thrive. And if they come to you with that, then you should go through with those recommendations for the students. And then also seeing beyond these limitations of various assessments that would place students in situations that would keep them stuck in an assessment rut. So can't pass that particular state assessment, can't pass the SAT, can't pass the ACT. So we've labeled them, or we've tracked them, and we said they just don't have it. They just don't have the goods. Is that really true? Maybe they do. Maybe they just need a little bit more probing, and maybe they just need a little bit more conceptual understanding around those learning projections, and they need a better built learning trajectory to help them get there. And guess what? The teacher is the perfect person to help them to do it. And so, in conclusion, we have to understand that learning progressions, they can help guide student achievement as students progress academically towards their math trajectory. We also have to help students succeed in their math trajectories by providing opportunities for them to excel in advanced math courses despite various assessment limitations and biases. We have to aim to choose to close the achievement gap and the opportunity gap for all learners as we cultivate growth mindset for each student. And we also want to make sure that we're harnessing grit in each student by motivating them through challenging math as they remain on track of their trajectories while pursuing college and career readiness. So with that said, thank you so much for having me today. It was an honor to talk to you guys about learning trajectories and learning progressions and how those affect student achievement. You can contact me at iwhite@larsontex.com. Visit my website, www.india-white.com. You can follow me on social media. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. LinkedIn is The India White. And then, of course, I have my Facebook and my Instagram listed as well. It's been an honor being here with you guys. You can also scan that QR code to get more of my contact information, and I would love to keep in touch. Any questions at this time? Feel free to ask. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Dr. White is now available for a live Q&A. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
Yeah, I just want to just make sure everybody understood the difference between, of course, a learning progression and a trajectory. And sometimes you'll see that there are coherence maps out there that basically are walking you through a learning progression and showing you different trajectories that can, help students navigate through a course successfully so that they can continue to build. I think right now there's, a lot of talk regarding, various high school pathways of, should students take, for instance, data science, or should they take Algebra 1, or what should they take whenever they are crossing over into high school? And there has been a voice of concern of, well, we don't want to leave students behind by doing a certain route of, AGA route versus a data science route. This is why having this conversation about learning progressions and high school pathways is imperative, because our nation has to continue to move forward, but at the same time, we have to continue to provide equitable opportunities for all students to learn and progress through their learning in a way that is really going to serve the majority of our learners. And so I think that as long as we keep options on the table, this is really going to help us with moving forward in college and career readiness for all students. So we have a question here. How would you suggest that folks make leaders in their respective school districts aware of the information in today's session? I would say tell them that, you attended the IAS Math Summit and that you heard from leaders, just kind of across the nation, and that this was a topic of discussion when you're talking about various pathways for students in math, and to keeping, regarding keeping options open. Let's hear this session and have a discussion as to where we are in our school district and where we're planning on going, looking at your 5-year map that you guys might have at your school district, and seeing where are you in that. How have your achievements been regarding graduation rates? How are the students doing generally? How are they doing regarding their SES, their socioeconomic status? How are they doing race, ethnicity wise in math as they're progressing through school and progressing through those math courses? And are you really producing in your school district students that can contribute to society in STEM fields and in other higher ed coursework, or are students being not really being given an opportunity because they're not being exposed to those higher high school pathways? So that's a conversation to have. It could be a little bit uncomfortable at first, but I think presenting the data is the best thing to do. Not going in with opinion, but going in with data. And then this session, of course, will provide you ample research, that will help you navigate through that conversation.
Thank you to Felicia for that question. We have about 1 minute left. So unless there are any last minute questions, we're about to close out the session. Thank you all so much for coming today and listening to Dr. White's fabulous talk.
Yes, thank you all very much. And I hope to connect with many of you via email, iwhite@larsontex.com, or you can go to my website, www.india-white.com. So if you're wanting more information, let's connect. Let's have some conversations. Let's help our students.
Thank you all. Have a great one.